There are albums, and then there are the ones that mark an era, an occasion, a time in life. This year marks the 20th year anniversary of one of those albums, Meds by Placebo. And for me, this album is very special. It feels a lot like a document of survival. When I say that, it's not only Brian Molko's, Placebo's frontman, but also mine's. On his case, this album is also a document of addiction, self-destruction, honesty without polish. While on my case, it's an album that marks a very miserable moment in my emotional life. When this album came out, I had just been broken up with 2 months before by email. Yeah, let that sink in. Till that day, I think 2006 got to be the worst and the most self-destructive year of my life. I don't quite remember being sober that year. Maybe I wasn't. And the emotional devastation, complete sense of humiliation and betrayal permeated that year and was only slowly watered down by 2007's Carnival era, which for me is telling since I usually dislike Carnival season. However, I have that to thank for, and the whole year of 2007, one of the best years of my life, for helping me cleanse. Not only that, but the album Meds, and consequently the Placebo concert from that tour in 2007 when they came to play here in Rio, and I obviously was there to experience. Anyway, for this and way, way more, I didn't want to let this anniversary pass quietly. So Meds came out at a time when vulnerability in alternative rock was raw, uncomfortable, and often ugly. And that's exactly why it worked. And especially why it worked for me at that time. This wasn't an album trying to be cool. It was an album trying to be true, even when the truth was hard to look at. So back in 2021, when Meds was turning 15, I created a full series on this channel reacting to each track of the album, talking about the songs, the stories behind them, my takes on it, and the recording process. And there are many interesting stories and facts behind the songwriting and the state of mind of especially Brian, Molko, but also Stefan, behind the recording of those songs and what they were aiming for with that album. So if you're looking for a more in-depth look into this beautiful, beautiful album, I suggest you watch that series. I'm going to put the link here on the screen, and you can just go there and watch it if you're more interested in the stories behind Meds. In any case, Meds was an album of rebirth for the band. Quite ironically, the last one that drummer Steve Hewitt would be a part of as a member of the band. Brian has said that he wanted to quote-unquote kill the Nancy boy in that album, which was a character he had been playing since the release of their first album, the self-titled Placebo, almost 30 years ago, also turning 30 this year. So by 2006, he'd been playing that character for 10 years and he wanted out. They wanted to go back to the basics, and Brian just, at the time of the recording, his girlfriend was expecting a baby, so he just became a father after that, and he wanted to get out of that life of addiction and known treated mental illnesses that had been plaguing him for quite a while. And this album, not coincidentally named Meds, is the expression of that struggle. So he poured that out blatantly in those lyrics, clearly documenting his struggles not only with addiction but also with codependency, emotional numbness, and sometimes even a cruel tinged kind of self-awareness, like Brian always does. Those ones were obviously without a redemption arc to be seen. And in terms of music, they wanted to, like I said, they wanted to go back to the basics, to the rawness and the realness of the good old days instead of the gimmickry they had been messing around with on the previous two albums, especially on Sleeping with Ghosts, the last one before Meds, which I always think sounds pretty bleak, ascetic, something like that, but in a very good way, if you know what I mean. So Meds ends up sounding more raw and simple in terms of production than those two previous ones, like Sleeping with Ghosts and Black Market Music, these ones that I'm talking about. However, Meds is way more visceral and real, which is something I truly, truly enjoy and love. And definitely is my second favorite Placebo album, coming only after Without You I'm Nothing, which is another very raw and visceral album. And it's the sophomore album. So by the time Meds was released, Placebo were already a well-established band. But this album feels like a band standing at the edge of something, you know, like burnout, excess, collapse, and maybe clarity. And there's a sense throughout this record that something has to break in order for anything to survive. And Brian Molko said about Infra-red, the second song of the album, and one of the most loved and played songs of Meds, quote, as many other songs in this album, this one also revolves around alcohol. When you drink, you often become very angry at people who manipulated you in the past. I think this song lives in a space between destruction and hope that carries the theme of this album. And what Brian said just confirms that for me. I certainly feel that when every time I listen to this song, there's a very specific feeling and some very specific people I see whenever I'm singing this. It's almost like a feeling of release, you know, the release of hurt through angry words. It feels like he's expressing his pain through anger, like many of us do. I know I do. But it's raw and true and ugly. And that's what makes it relatable to me. Brian has a sense of honesty that not many singers or songwriters have nowadays. Yes, sometimes it can border on extreme pessimism, but I guess he himself has admitted to that on recent years. However, I guess I can relate to that too. It's just that sometimes there's just so much ugliness and darkness around us that it gets hard to see the light beyond that. But the light is always there. I like the thought of shadows only being a thing because there is light to cast them. It's a beautiful way of thinking about these moments. I think there's a Murakami quote, if I'm not mistaken, in 1Q84, a book that I adore, that goes like this, quote, where there is light, there must be shadow. Where there is shadow, there must be light. There is no shadow without light and no light without shadow. It feels a lot like what I read in a Tao, and that makes a lot of sense to me. So I feel like Brian specifically was in one of those pivotal moments where he felt something had to break for the band to survive. And maybe it had something to do with the eventual firing of Placebo's drummer Steve Hewitt, because I read that it was rumored at the time that Brian and Steve had a hard time during the Meds album recording. So if that's true, and coming from everything else that I've already mentioned about other tensions in his personal life, I believe it may have been the main reason behind that outcome. Sonically, Meds is restrained but heavy. Not heavy specifically in distortion, but really heavy in emotion. Space matters. Silence matters. Every song feels like it's breathing or struggling to breathe. Meds, the first song from the album, is angsty and desperate, almost bordering hopelessness, just like the music video that accompanies it. And Alison Mosshartz, the front woman from The Kills, featuring vocals in that song adds a somewhat decadent, sexy vibe to it that reminds me of how it feels when you're listening to it. And this song is pretty visual for me. I can see myself inside it and I can walk through it as I sing it. And every time I sing it, I see those visuals.
Did you forget to take your meds, baby? Did you forget to take your meds? Someone call the ambulance. There's gonna be an accident.
Infra-red, like I mentioned earlier, is rage and revenge in form of a song. Nothing screams more hatred towards someone than the line, "Someone call the ambulance, there's gonna be an accident." It's a vile and dark lyric, and the song is pretty fun to jump around to during Placebo shows. I just thought to mention that.
To watch you fall. So I came down to crash and burn your beggars banquet. Someone call the ambulance. You're always ahead of the game. I drag behind.
Then there's Drag, a very upbeat and yet very depressing song. On my series of videos 5 years ago, I mentioned that Placebo is one of those bands that can make you dance to the most depressing lyrics, and I stick to that. This is a very nice song to jump around to and dance to, but with very self-deprecating lyrics that make my heart hurt.
You're always ahead of the pack. I drag behind. Well, you possess every trait that I lack, by coincidence or by design. We're sewn together. She's born to mesmerize. Side a strider. I don't inside her.
Following Drag, we have one of my favorite songs from the album and from Placebo, that is Space Monkey, and it's one of the old songs from Sleeping with Ghosts era. Brian considers this song to be a real journey of discovery, since he claims that it felt like it came out of nowhere. It's also linked to my favorite B-side of them called Lenny, and the lyrics to the live version of Lenny is almost the same as the lyrics to the chorus of Space Monkey. So in my head, they're both intimately connected, which only makes this song even more significant for me, since it gets me every time I listen to it. Intimately linked to a couple of very cruel heartbreaks that I've been through in my life in the past, when those two songs were my saviors, literally speaking. So the intensity, the desperation, the helplessness, they're all there, and you can feel it through Brian's voice. And that's the thing I love about Placebo, and especially the way Brian sings his songs. You can almost feel his feelings through his voice, and it's pretty beautiful.
100 degrees. We're sewn together. She's born to mesmerize. Beside a strider, I die inside her.
So to kind of numb us after that, we have Follow the Cops Back Home, which was reportedly inspired by Iceland when Brian and Stefan were there for the first time. They said that they go out to sightsee and see absolutely no cops around, and they feel like no one lived there. And they wondered what the people who actually lived there did, like every day, because to them it felt like there was nothing to do over there. Well, I think Bjork would disagree with you there, Placebo, but Anyway, this song sounds like a somewhat translation of that feeling of numbness and forced resilience portrayed in the lyrics, while the music speaks what the words cannot speak. It's intense and painful and sad, and it's really interesting that I've always listened to that song and always pictured ice in my head. The visuals were always icy, and then I didn't know that they were inspired by Iceland, so they did a very good job there, because I've always felt like it was icy visuals whenever I listen to that song, so it's pretty cool.
I'll give you nothing else to do. Now we're stuck on rewind. Let's follow the cops back home. Follow the cops back home. It's in the water, baby. It's in the pills that bring you down.
Okay, so now we finally arrive in the middle of the album with Post Blue, one of my favorites of all time. A very codependent, sexy, toxic love song, if you know what I'm trying to get to here. And that's why I love it so much. Classic Placebo. This is Placebo at its core, with Brian comparing a toxic, codependent relationship to alcohol addiction. Yeah. Then we move to Because I Want You, another desperate pleading song, very intense, very urgent, very loud, not much dynamic here, just like the pleading and the heartbroken lyrics suggest. It's a pretty in-your-face song, and as Brian already said, that everything you need to know about that song is in the lyrics, so it's pretty much what it is.
I want you to, 'cause I want you to. You from the sea and guarantee source divine. Rid you of possessions fleet remain your funny Valentine.
Okay, now that we danced a lot to a couple of depressing songs again, we are met with Blind, the next song, a truly sad song in the truest sense of the word. It's another one of the oldies, meaning a wannabe B-side reminiscent from the Sleeping with Ghosts era. The version featured in the album is actually the one originally recorded during the Sleeping with Ghosts sessions, only having changed the vocals and added some overdubs. This is a very sorrowful and guilty-ridden song, very sweet, sad, and heartbreaking all at the same time. Brian hinted that it has similarities with a song from their first album called I Know. I love that song. I also did a cover of the song here in the channel. If you want to watch it, I'll put the link in the video. And anyway, that those two songs are both about the painful, abrupt ending of a relationship and how the world goes on and you just have to live with that pain. Ouch. Yeah. That last part of the song, Blind, always gets me. The part where he keeps repeating, I know you're broken. I know you're broken. During a few of their more recent shows, he sings that over and over again, and in the end, the last part, he just repeats, I know, or I know, something like that. That reminded me of his latest version of I Know that he plays in shows more recently, that he also finishes the song with, I know you love the song, but not the singer. I know. Because in the first Placebo record, this part in the end, he doesn't sing anything. But in more recent shows, he started singing this that I just sang. I think it became even more devastating. Maybe he got this thing that to connect the two songs that he already mentioned that they were kind of similar. So maybe he did that on purpose. I don't know. But this I Know is, for me, an obvious nod to the song I Know. And it makes my heart ache even more when I listen to that.
Dreaming on the bed, see you right back here tomorrow.
Okay, now that we're very ultra sad and crying, why not get us depressed? Of course, says Placebo. And we're led into one of the more violent, self-loathing and miserable songs in their catalog. The song called Pierrot The Clown. Don't get me wrong, I love this song, but I gotta be honest here for the faint of heart. This is not an easy pill to swallow. These lyrics are pretty dark, pretty ugly, brutal, and painful to listen to. And I applaud Brian for being so raw and honest and visceral like that, because this is definitely not an easy thing to do. And this song, go listen to it and you know what I mean. The first time I listened to that song, I got chills.
How your promises rang hollow as you threw me to the ground. And if you're ever around, we rise above the hills, we'll cry about this as we live and learn.
Anyway, going forward, if we ever can, after that devastating song, we are greeted by Broken Promise, with its violence now focused outwards. And it's another vengeful song, bitter, angry, claustrophobic. This song is my sister, and I love it. I wish I could have sung this to a couple of horrible people I've had in my life in the past. But since I couldn't, at least it made me feel seen and understood during those painful moments that I've been through. And having R.E.M's Michael Stipe featuring in it only made it more special to me because I love R.E.M. and I love his voice. I really liked that Brian mentioned once that, quote, although this song is about adultery, it may also be more generally seen as a song about the abuse of trust, unquote, which to him, quote, is one of the worst things that can happen to you and one of the worst things that you can do to someone else, unquote. And I totally agree. I think this song just shows you that in the best way possible.
Apology in your regret, that sounds absurd. Keep singing. I'll wait my turn to tear inside you. The back of the class is where I was, keeping quiet, playing dumb. Can't you see these skies are breaking? The top of the class is where I'm from, and I am one.
So now we are approaching the end of this album and of this very intense and emotional journey, and we suddenly run into One of a Kind. And what is this, man? This is a very random song in the midst of all of those intense and emotional, raw, bleeding heart songs. You know, I do like this song though. I don't think it fits this album. Or maybe it would make more sense as a hidden song after a song to say goodbye. I don't know. But right here, to me, it's disconnected. Maybe it's because they wrote this song as a joke to confront the label's pressure for a single. I don't know. Theme-wise, it's a very self-aware song bordering on spiritual awakening themes that Brian would go more into in later albums, which were all part of him embracing spirituality to help him staying sober, even though this one reeks of sarcasm. And for that, I do like this song. I just don't understand what it is doing in this spot in the album. So it always weirds me out when I'm listening to the album and One of a Kind pops up out of nowhere. I usually skip it. Sorry, Placebo.
I am out of the room and into the void. I wanna try, but I get annoyed. Can't you see these skies are breaking?
Okay, so now we're over this bump in the road. We're back on schedule with In the Cold Light of Morning, another very self-loathing, self-reflecting, self-aware song. This song could have been the soundtrack to my life many, many times. And the way Brian describes self-loathing so poetically in pure sarcasm always gets to me. And the eeriness of the arrangements, the vocals, the creepy vibes in the middle, all of it helps intensify this uncomfortable feeling behind the song and around the song, you know.
You are one of God's mistakes.
And finally, we reached the end. The last song to say goodbye. Non-ironically, this is actually the song title, which goes further down the rabbit hole of self-loathing and self-awareness. This one is my favorite song in the album. I love it so much, I can never get tired of it. And Brian has said that he's actually talking to himself in this song. It's like a letter he wrote to himself about himself, and it's said to be the oldest song of this record, with Brian having written it when he was in India after a complete change of mind and his way of living his life and stuff. It's a very harsh and cruel message to oneself, but as always, the music is banging and it makes me want to jump around every time I listen to it. The eeriness and the alarming feeling that the guitar riffs and the rhythms make me feel seems like the soundtrack to a mini horror movie to me. And I don't know, war suspense kind of feeling, you know? And I really love it, just like I love horror movies. Anyway, this album is a real journey, and this approach to songwriting has definitely shaped the way I think about music, atmosphere, and the emotional weight to this day.
Someone to whom I could relate. Your needle and jar damage done remains a sordid twist of the fight. Now I'm trying to wake you.
Like I said earlier in this video, this album found me at a moment when I needed music that didn't pretend things were fine. Meds taught me that darkness doesn't need to be swallowed, put to the side, and forgotten about until it bites you in the ass. It taught me that expressing those dark feelings was not only valid, but a way to be more powerful. Sometimes you just need to be honest. And this has definitely shown up in my work, especially my latest EP, Final Nail in a Coffin, where I shared a lot of ugly feelings that I've been wanting to bury deep inside my heart, but I couldn't. And Brian Molko's raw vulnerability and courage, putting himself out there for public scrutiny, always inspired me, even though it's taken me a while to catch up to him. And this album, Meds, was the greatest catalyst. Each year that goes by, I love and connect to it more and more. The grief, the hurt, the vulnerability, the self-awareness, those are all things that need time to accept. And Meds is the perfect document of that era in Placebo's history and also in mine. Well, so here we are, 20 years later, and Meds still feels uncomfortable. And I think that it's its greatest strength. It reminds us that art doesn't have to heal you, at least not so nicely. And sometimes it just has to sit with you in the dark and just be there with you. And this album did that for me. And it still does.